So welcome everyone to this month's Monday Morning Modernism presentation with John Seed. It's great to see you, John, as always. I look forward to this every month. And I'm excited about today's topic, which is postmodernism. I noticed you have sort of a, maybe I'm just late coming to it, John, but you have sort of an updated bio on your website. So I recommend everybody go to johnseed.com and you can check that out. And I like the photo you use too. But but I just wanted to mention John Seed is a retired art professor living on California's Central Coast. I kind of took this from your bio. His life in art began with studies at Stanford University and UC Berkeley, and was shaped by interactions with very notable artists such as Nathan Oliveira and Basquiat and Richard Diebenkorn. So you can't have a much better list in your, in your pocket than that. For over 3 decades, he taught studio art and art history and has taught modernism at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. I'll just sort of skip forward. Since 2013, he's served on the board of Sam Francis Foundation, and he currently serves as the president of Green Space, the Cambria Land Trust. And of course, we all know that John's writing has appeared in Art Ltd, the Huffington Post, Hyperallergic, Arts of Asia, and other fine publications. And his book, Disrupted Realism, if you haven't ever checked that out, you should do so. I have my copy and I'm looking forward to the next one. John's book, Disrupted Realism, Painting for a Distracted World, features the works of 38 contemporary artists. So I just thought I don't think there's anybody out there who doesn't know who you are, but I thought I should mention a few of your accolades. So now I'm just going to turn things over to you. Thanks for letting me go on about you a little bit. Welcome, John Seed. Welcome, everybody.
Martha, thank you so much. And I will go right to screen share so I can bring up my topic. All right, and hopefully you are all seeing Michael Heiser's imposing city on your screen. And today's topic is postmodernism. Let's dive right into it. Just a reminder, I think I recognize most of the names that I saw there in chat, but if you are new, I want to let you know that you are here at Monday Morning Modernism, which today we are renaming. Today it's Monday Morning Postmodernism, which you'll know all about in a few minutes. And we have been running these every Monday, first of each month for, this is the 14th. So this is the 14th month we've done it. We have one more. We have number 15 on Jean-Michel Basquiat coming up next month. And then this series will be over and Martha and I will put our heads together and say, what should we do next? But I so appreciate the sponsorship of the Winslow Art Center.
Mutual admiration, John.
Thank you. It's much, kind of makes my day, actually. But okay, let's not go there. Let's get into the topic. I'm going to start out with a kind of a true college lecture. I'm going to give you some bullet points. And if you're inclined to take notes, don't, because this will be on video and you can go back and you can take notes from it, with pause or take it in. But I want you to just really feel present, feel like you can appreciate the material. So it's a little wonky here in the beginning, but when we get to the artist, it'll be a little bit fresher. But I just want to put it out there. What is postmodernism? And maybe the first thing I should mention is, do historians give us a date or a time period when postmodernism begins? And they really don't. But let's just say you see signs of it in the 1960s and definitely by the early 70s. Postmodernism in some form or another is with us. It is a skeptical way of making art. It's a skeptical philosophy. Maybe the word skeptical is going to be central. And it really questions the whole notion of progress that was so potent and so important to modern art. It definitely likes to question the meanings of things. It's very, very skeptical of definitions and what you'd call fixed meanings. Definitely postmodern philosophers and artists and critics are not very big on what we would call objective facts. They would say, well, that's naive of you if you just, accept a fact and you don't question it. They're not very happy with the idea of binary opposition, which of course means there's a yes or a no or a true or a false that's very, very clear. They're interested in that gray area in between those things. In the spirit of skepticism, there's a questioning of identity, category, and hierarchy with a real focus on power, especially social and cultural power. And I would say maybe the great weakness and the great strength of postmodernism is that it assumes there is no one correct way to make art. So just to introduce you to a couple of the figureheads, a couple of the thinkers that influenced postmodernism as it developed. Here's one name you may have heard, Jean Baudrillard. He says that in our current society, that we really don't have a fixed reality the way we might want to, and that symbols and signs and human experiences really can be seen as a kind of a screen. He calls it a simulacra, a form of simulation. And that notion, which I think came out of existentialism, is very, very prevalent in lots of movies and lots of literature, the idea of multiple or false realities, and very powerful idea in postmodernism. You may have also heard, or maybe heard too often, the word deconstruction. And if you have followed my blogging, I actually started out, writing very skeptically about deconstruction. It's not a word or a process that I'm entirely comfortable with, but it is central to postmodernism. And to present it to you, it means the breaking down or the analyzing of something to go towards a true significance, something more pure. And it's almost never exactly what an artist or an author might have intended. And I should tell you that deconstruction first appeared and was discussed in the context of literature. It was a literary term that got applied to art mainly in the early 70s. But when you deconstruct, maybe as a critic or maybe in the creation of your artwork, it's going to allow economic and social contexts to be there, to be present in your idea formation. It means, as you'd expect, going beyond the obvious. So no sign or no symbol should be left unturned or unexamined. It involves exploring life experiences and identity. And that's a very powerful theme in postmodern and contemporary art. And of course, here's the kicker. It's an opportunity to question all traditional assumptions. Two more thinkers that if you want to explore and read more deeply, and this is heavy reading, be ready for your intellect to be challenged if you have read or if you're going to read either of these philosophers. But here is what Derrida said about deconstruction. He said, it's not negative. He said, it's affirmative. It's in favor of reaffirming memory in the most adventurous and risky way, and looking at traditions and institutions and teaching and so on. And again, re-examining and reaffirming the structures behind our institutions and our cultural products. By the way, the wonky part of the lecture, we're almost getting to the art. So if you're shutting off, if you're making a snack in the kitchen and muting, that's okay, but we are going to get to the art in a minute. But two more terms for you. Bricolage, boy, that applies to an awful lot of postmodern painting, but it's the construction of a work from diverse, media and sources, things that happen to be available if you are opportunistic as a creative person. And appropriation is when you take an existing object or image and you take it often very literally. You just grab it or copy it, and without applying a transformation to it, you use it in your painting or your cultural product. So bricolage and appropriation, I'll point out in some of the works of art that we look at where these things crop up. What are some of the styles in media? While you stare at this one, I just want to say something about postmodernism, and maybe I can even make you laugh about postmodernism, which is hard to do. But postmodernism, I think it's the lamest label ever given to an art-ism, because what postmodernism really means is it came after modernism. So some of the values of modernism were lost, but then there's this kind of explosion, this kind of flowering of all kinds of styles and media and approaches. And this is a partial list. because I think there simply are as many isms as there are individuals now, and it is kind of a frustrating exercise to even try and label much postmodern art. And there are certainly many works that might carry half a dozen of these overlaid with each other. But you will recognize some outstanding movements: idea-oriented art, which we call conceptual, light and space, which came out of California, Terrell and Irwin, dealing with atmosphere and lighting, and so on and so forth. But these are some of the magazine and book labels that you may have come across. But I think that says it all. You know, in terms of being able to appreciate my lecture today, anything goes. And I want to warn you that I have not been categorical in putting this together. I'm going to wander around chronologically. I'm going to wander around stylistically. I'm going to be sort of all over the map, because I think that's the proper way to talk about postmodernism. You know, I can't organize it. You know, we'll see later if you can. I think it became very, very important in the late 60s, early 70s to have a Bible for postmodernism, you know, to have some kind of an intellectual backdrop. And that very definitely for many, many years was Art Forum magazine. And Art Forum magazine is where you could go when I was a college student, when you wanted some real heavy-duty academics to talk to you about art in a philosophical way, to deconstruct, if you will, the imagery and the strange art that was appearing on the magazine's pages. So Art Forum played a very, very critical role, as did some other specialty magazines, but Art Forum really was the queen of these publications. And I just wanted to give you a sample of what was it like to read Art Forum in the 70s. And, you know, don't look at the PowerPoint and feel like you have to read all of that, but I'll maybe give you a sentence. I just want to show you how it's not what you would have expected 30 or 40 years earlier with formalist criticism, you know, about space or color or brushwork. Instead, you talk about media for reproduction, or special channel characteristics, or stratification that's mechanically arrived at. You can see how philosophical and how rigorous the language was of a magazine like Art Forum. And I once had a professor joke when I was in art school. He said, the way to be successful in New York is to have your paintbrush in your right hand and Art Forum in your left. Which, if you're left-handed, you would reverse that. But anyways, a feeling for the literature of the time. I've got several artists I'm going to give you a little bit of depth about. And with a 45-minute presentation, you know, a little bit of depth means 3 minutes. Many other artists, I'll give you a single image. But I thought, let's take a few moments with Joseph Beuys, because he personifies many of the qualities and many of the things that evolved in the postmodern era. He was political, he was an artist, he was an environmentalist, he was a thinker, he was, you know, he was just so many things, and he was a kind of a shaman. If you've ever read Joseph Campbell said that a shaman is someone who's been psychologically changed by a trauma. And that was definitely Joseph Beuys. He was a pilot in the Luftwaffe. He flew a Stuka dive bomber that crashed in Crimea in 1944. He was burned, but he was survived. And he survived because a group of nomads found him and took care of him. They wrapped him up in animal hides and fat and felt to keep him warm. So after his recovery, when he developed, you know, as into an artist, those materials became prime to his artwork. And that's why you see his Volkswagen bus in the Guggenheim there with sleds of felt strapped to them. And that's why you see the big triangle of fat on the chair that sat in an office in a German university. These were things that took him to his personal experience. And his philosophy was that spiritual phenomena could be studied and explained in the same way that rational science explains the physical world. So his performances, which really were often lectures or combined with lectures, were about finding unexpected connections in the spiritual and the rational world. So, for example, if you'd gone to hear Joseph Beuys lecturing in Ireland in 1974, you would have seen him in his characteristic fedora. in front of a row of chalkboards, making diagrams that were part artistry and part theory. And you can see here he's pointing and taking a question from the crowd. And here's a Joseph Beuys chalkboard. I don't think he considered them works of art, even though many of them got preserved. This one deals with the idea of a sun state, which sounds a little bit like the idea of Louis XIV, the Sun King, but somehow transposed into something more poetic, and I'm sure environmentally oriented because he was an environmentalist. And Beuys was making, among other things, he was a kind of a critic. He was making a critique of Western culture, the culture that had sent him to war. So maybe in that sense, you could say that Beuys was a bit Dada. And when he wrapped a grand piano in felt and put what looks like the symbol of the Red Cross on it, these big red crosses, here's what he said about it. He said, the piano is an instrument to produce sound, but when not in use, it still has sound potential. When no sound is possible, the piano is condemned to silence. So, he has changed our idea about the potential of the instrument by wrapping it. The relationship to the human position is the red crosses of emergency. If we remain silent, we fail to make the next evolutionary step. And you can hear the activist voice of Beuys coming through in that statement. So among the many public projects that he created, his most famous is 7,000 Oaks, which took place, it started with the Documenta, an art show in Kassel, Germany in 1982. And he had quarried 7,000 basalt steles, or pieces of vertical pieces of rock, and they were each planted with a small oak tree. So it took many, many years to carry this out. It took a lot of volunteers, but it is now a major part of the city of Kassel. He wanted to transform that city through this project. And he said, I think the tree is an element of regeneration that in itself is a concept of time. So that is just a taste of Joseph Beuys, but how different from Picasso, right? Picasso being the artist in his studio with canvases or making sculpture, working with the traditional media. Beuys is working with nature, and he's working with the world. And I'm going to show you a short video, which if you speak German, I think it will mean more to you. It's a 3-minute video, but it's his most famous performance that took place in New York. He got off a plane from Germany and was taken wrapped up in an ambulance to a gallery in New York City where he has a conversation with a coyote. And the coyote represents the past wild nature of the American continent. It is strangely moving, and I'll play this for you, and then we'll go forward.
Noch im selben Jahr ist Beuys wieder in Amerika. Aber er betritt den amerikanischen Boden nicht. Er will Amerika nicht sehen. Mit dem Krankenwagen lässt er sich in die Galerie René Bloch bringen. Das ist seine Art der Rache für die jahrzehntelange Missachtung europäischer Kunst durch amerikanische Galeristen.
There's a little more to the video, but that gives you a feeling of the events. Lot to think about, and we'll move forward. Judy Chicago was an artist that really came through in the 70s with her great presentation, The Dinner Party, which was a collaborative work of art. There were 129 women involved in the making of this. And I remember seeing it at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and taking it all in. The principal component, the concept of the dinner party is that it's a massive ceremonial banquet in the shape of a triangle, which in itself is a symbol of equality. It's 48 feet on each side with 39 place settings. And these three wings each relate to imagery of famous and notable women from three different eras of history, going all the way from prehistory to Rome, Christianity to the Reformation, and then the American Revolution until the present of this piece. And each one was represented by this kind of roundel, which often had female imagery, vaginal imagery, or flower imagery, which must have really, really annoyed Georgia O'Keeffe, who was still alive, because she always said her flowers were not vaginas. But here she is honored with a ceramic plate at the Georgia O'Keeffe place setting. Talking about painting, well, moving more quickly now. I wish we had time like we had with Joseph Beuys, but painting took on a very, very different set of characteristics in the early 80s when it made a resurgence. And I definitely think that appropriation and bricolage are there in the work of David Salle. He had worked on a, what would you call it, a pulp magazine, a stag magazine, as a paste-up artist before magazines were constructed digitally. And it really came to him naturally to just edit together on canvas or on fabric all these different disparate images, which in some way add up or don't add up. And maybe you can notice that I think it's canvas on the left, it's ochre fabric in the center, and then tartan, printed fabric, plaid fabric on the right. His paintings were always put together of these kind of disparate panels with backgrounds that seemed out of place and oddly abstract. Some of them had objects attached to them. I remember one I saw in New York that had a lead-wrapped rubber ducky affixed to the canvas. Francesco Clementi had studios both in India and in New York, and brought together imagery that would make us call him a neo-expressionist. That was another powerful kind of movement that appeared in the 80s. Jean-Michel Basquiat, who we'll talk about next time, really came out of what you would now call street art or graffiti, even though he later did not like to be called a graffiti artist. He actually had spent a lot of time in museums growing up in New York, and was very, very interested in abstract expressionism and Cy Twombly. And I think Joseph Beuys influenced him, because there is in Basquiat's paintings this feeling of kind of a history lecture going on. I think Beuys is part of it. But you can see, the raw energy and the countercultural anti-racist messages of Basquiat that came through. It is a characteristic of more and more postmodern art that language and imagery could come together, as it did in Basquiat. Eric Fischl, like David Salle, attended Cal Arts in Southern California, a school that had been funded by the Disney family. And his professors were some of the first to bring back suitcases full of European magazines with deconstruction theory. So a lot of postmodern painters came out of Cal Arts. And what Fischl became known for was he created very, very powerful, even awkward psychological narratives. But the way he painted them was a little bit flat-footed. He didn't have the skill of the previous generation of painters. And I remember there was a show curated by Marcia Tucker, maybe in the late 70s, called Bad Painting, where curators began to celebrate the fact that it was technically unskilled artists were making powerful statements. And in a way, the naivete of Eric Fischl's painting was part of the statement, that the story predominated. Gerhard Richter, he might just be the most influential painter of the late 20th century, because what he did is he brought together approaches to painting that you just wouldn't have thought would belong together. He was a photorealist who made very, very convincing photorealist paintings. Then he began to blur those paintings, sometimes with a brush and sometimes with a squeegee, and brought them into the realm of painting. And then what he's become known for more recently are these massive squeegee abstractions. So going all the way from photographic representation, hyperrealism, to abstraction, and somehow having them be connected has made him a very, very fascinating artist to watch. Frank Stella, his black paintings were really connected with minimalism. That was one of the powerful early isms of postmodernism. And they all have very severe geometry. They have a sense of being constructed with a certain impartiality. The abstraction carries the day, just the way that story carries the way in Eric Fischl. And then somebody once said to me that Frank Stella is a little bit like General Motors. He comes out with a new model every 3 years, and that's really true. And I think this is one of the pieces done with aircraft aluminum, honeycombed aluminum, that he did in the 80s. And you can see he is playing the edge between, is it a relief? Is it a sculpture? Is it a painting? Is it all those things? And that's an edge that a lot of postmodernists have played. For example, Elizabeth Murray, whose image is behind me today as I'm speaking to you. She really found a way to, what would you say, confuse painting, to make painting break up. It seems to be a little bit related to Cubism. It seems to be a little bit related to relief sculpture, but it also has its own vernacular. And look at the spectacular kind of forms and wobbles and creases and improvisations that are there. Those things maybe came from her love of abstract expressionism. So that's a characteristic of postmodern art, is that so many different influences and ideas can tumble into a single work of art. And I don't think artists were worried too much about being coherent or being singular. They were more worried about just letting it all happen as a form of questioning, what should art look like? What should art be? Eva Hess is an artist who I think everyone feels, died far too young. She had very, very radical ideas about sculpture and used materials that just hadn't been seen before as sculpture. Fiberglass cloth, coiled rope, surgical tubing, silicone, very, very inventive in the way she used materials. And along with being rigorous, along with being a pretty idea-oriented intellectual artist, she was also funny. And this particular piece, Hang Up, from 1966, is something she really wanted to be absurd, kind of an absurd meditation on, what is a painting and what is sculpture, and what if you empty out the whole tradition of painting and you have a frame that really wouldn't pass as a frame in most galleries, but there it is. It's an object that it's hard to walk by. There's a whole set of ideas animating this work. Another material that showed up in the work, I think I've seen it in Richard Serra, but also in Robert Morris, was heavy felt. Maybe Beuys inspired that. But the word I would apply to this Robert Morris sculpture is I would call it provisional. And by provisional, I just mean informal, almost unplanned, has an element of chance about it. So you tack it up to the wall to spread its wings, if you will, and you let the material do what the material is going to do. It's a little bit like what some painters do, of following the direction of the paint as they develop their imagery. Here, Morris is saying, what about sculpture that comes from the qualities of new materials not from the need to make something permanent or make something monumental. It's anti-monumental. Here's Richard Serra, who I think a lot of you know for his massive metal plates. He did an early piece which brought together performance and sculpture. He worked with hot lead and spewed it, sprayed it against a gallery wall. So there's an element of danger, which I think has been a big part of Richard Serra's work. This was in the foyer of the new San Francisco MoMA for quite a while. These fantastic curved pieces of battleship armor that took so much computer technology to bend. And it just gives me a headache to think about what they took to install. And I can give you a personal anecdote about Serra, because he installed a show at Gagosian Gallery when I worked there in early 1983. I was just about to leave the gallery, and the Serra show was the last show I worked on. And he brought 2 9-inch thick pieces of battleship armor that had to be planted in the wall of the gallery at an angle. And his installer was a man from New York named Ray LaChapelle, who showed me that every finger on both of his hands had been broken, working for Richard Serra and also, installing air conditioners in skyscrapers in New York. And we had a crane actually break the asphalt of our parking lot because the metal plates it was lifting were so heavy. But we got this thing installed. I don't have a photo of it, but here's a kind of a similar piece. And I was able to drive Richard Serra to a collector's house one day and talk to him. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Serra, what work of art influenced you, to make these big, direct, kind of overwhelming pieces? What was your biggest artistic influence? And here's his answer. He said, Matisse's Red Room, because Matisse's Red Room showed him the transformative power of having an aesthetic that overwhelmed everything else. In Matisse's case, it happens through color. In Serra's, it happens in weight and materiality. But isn't that interesting that Matisse gave him a major influence? Martin Puryear makes pieces that are really idiosyncratic. They are somewhere between craft, giant jewelry, and even representation. I think this piece, Big Bling, looks a little bit like an elephant or a seated dog. Maybe you can tell me later what you think it looks like. It's got a high degree of craftsmanship, but it also has a high degree of uselessness, which I think is part of the delight. Feels like almost like it could be a building, but it's not a building. Fantastic piece. Anish Kapoor started out his career just showing piles of pure pigment. And from there, he's developed a career that really plays with our sensations. And again, it raises these questions, is this sculpture? Or, what is it? Is it something in between other forms of art? But here is a brief video of a piece he's installed several times around the world called Dissension. And it is a whirlpool. So let me run that for you. It's not what you'd expect from a fountain, right? A fountain you'd expect to be exuberant and joyful, and that piece is very disturbing. You kind of want to say to your kids, get away from there. And there is a disturbing element in a lot of Kapoor. And then this very, very famous work that is in Chicago that has been nicknamed The Beam. Let me show you one more quick video to introduce you to another Kapoor work. You know, among other things, CloudGate is a selfie magnet. You know, people just go crazy taking their pictures in that. And if you look on YouTube, I found a very interesting video about how they clean it, because it's quite a thing to keep clean. But anyways, Anish Kapoor. Ai Weiwei was, of course, born in China and educated in the United States. And what he took away from his New York education was really a full course in postmodernism. So he took that tradition back to China, and I'm sure you know him as an artist/activist in the model of Joseph Beuys. And there is tremendous cultural and political criticism in the work of Ai Weiwei. For example, what's it mean to have what looks like a Han Dynasty pot, but with a label of Coca-Cola? What's that say about the collision between past culture and current westernized culture? Here's a gesture that he's famous for. He went to Tiananmen Square and photographed himself giving Mao the finger. And that's not an easy statement to make in China, but he's, known for making difficult statements. And I think if I wanted to recommend a work of art for you to learn about on YouTube, there's a lot of video on postmodern art. Watch the documentary about the sunflower seeds that he did at the Tate Turban Hall in Britain. It involved 10 tons of handmade porcelain sunflower seeds that were made in northern Jiangxi. And one of the ideas of Ai Weiwei in this presentation was not only to show the vastness of China and its people, but also to create employment. And I think he kept this town, it's an old porcelain town, kept a whole group of people employed for about 2 or 3 years, just making these 10 tons of seeds. And if you would like one, you can buy one on eBay. You can buy a handful of Ai Weiwei, porcelain sunflower seeds. There's so much to say about photography, and here I am giving you one photographer, but that's what happens when you do micro lectures like this one. Cindy Sherman, she began casting herself in what looked like Hitchcock or noir films and photographing herself. And then later, she has just taken on an amazing multitude of characters. She creates her own makeup, she creates her own costumes, she photographs herself, and has really given a very long, very bizarre essay, I would say, in photos on the notion of identity and on the notion of how you create your own identity and what that says about the society around you. Barbara Kruger is another artist who came out of magazine work. And I think after years of doing magazine layouts, it was natural for her to do, what would you call it, art propaganda. And these have a kind of a, sarcastic retro tone, as well as being very, very far left assertiveness. Here is a complete installation that she did at a museum on the East Coast, where the elevator says money makes money, and it all becomes inescapable, like moralistic billboards. And that's conceptual political. Michelangelo Pistoletto, an Italian-born artist who has dealt with perception of reality, putting together unexpected juxtapositions of real-world imagery and cultural vestiges, things that seem more like art to us, who have a more old-fashioned notion of art. And one thing he began to do quite a bit of in the 80s, he silk-screened images onto mirrors. So you would look at yourself in his work, but you would also see silk-screen imagery, and it really played with your mind as far as what were you looking at. Often there were art images that were, silk-screened onto the mirrors. Donald Judd was one of the most notable minimalists and theorists. He was also a curator, and he made these very, very perfectly crafted aluminum boxes that have a kind of a modularity. It's as if he's making art that insists on saying nothing, but in saying nothing, he says it so very beautifully. And if you have heard about Marfa, Texas, that's M-A-R-F-A, it's a town where near the end of his life, he created a whole series of minimal sculpture installations that were based on these aluminum modules. And of course, a whole art scene and a gallery scene has grown around Donald Judd's original installation, which was done on an old Air Force base. James Turrell, a California-based artist who comes from a Quaker background and who dealt with light and perception very early in his career. The first Turrell I ever saw was installed in an old Bank of America in Venice, California. And when you went in, it was like going in a dark movie theater. All the lights were down. But as you walked in, it looked like there was a single black painting on the back wall. And I remember kind of, having my eyes adjust, feeling my way in and walking toward this black square. When I got about 10 feet away, it suddenly changed from being what looked like a square on the wall to an infinitely deep space. It was like you could fall into the universe. It was chilling. I mean, it was really breathtaking and frightening. And that's what he deals with, the way that light and space change our perception. But here's a colored light piece he did recently. His greatest project, and he's been working on this more than 4 decades, I think, before it opened to the public. It's in the Arizona desert. It is called Rodin Crater, and you should be able to find out more online and find out what it takes to visit. And in the crater, he has carefully laid out experiences so that if you stand in a certain area or visit a certain area, you are going to have perceptions as the sky changes, as the light changes, as the planets realigned. And in making the Rodin Crater project, he worked with astronomers and made a note of different events that are going to happen in the planets for I think the next 1,000 years. So it has this ambition to be like a Stonehenge. And he says, my desire is to set up a situation in which I take you and let you see, and then that becomes your experience. Absolutely, profound artwork. Michael Heiser, another earthworks artist, did this levitated mast, or is responsible for this levitated mast at the LA County Museum of Art. It's another great selfie magnet. You always see people, holding it up in their photos. And I have a brief video now that will tell you a little bit about what it took to put it in place.
Mike told me, whatever you do, don't let them do that to that rock. I want it. I've been looking for this one for 30 or 40 years.
He said, this is it, this is the Colossi of Memnon. This has the scale of those kinds of ancient forms. And of course, then I stepped back and said, is anybody going to understand this?
Working on a rock? What do you mean you're working on a rock? How do you work on a rock?
This one's odd. This one is odd.
The thing about working with heavy objects, once it starts moving, it becomes really expensive if you have to stop the process.
They're going to build a structure and they're going to put it on top.
Who else would go and do this? I mean, I don't think you transform artistic practices by being rational and sane.
It's been a pain in the neck. That's what it's been.
This giant white wrapped thing with like an escort of police officers.
And who's to say that that rock is really a rock and it's not something else? Styrofoam around it?
I know everyone is not really here to see a rock, so what's really going on outside?
All of a sudden it became this like celebrity, this rock.
We're rock chasers now.
That's the one.
The rock.
There it is, buddy, look.
Rock! The rock! The rock!
I lived right behind it damn thing when it pulled up here.
I think it's nuts.
I think it's phenomenal.
It's a waste. It's not art. It came from nature.
I am so excited. This is like the coolest.
It parked right in front of my house, and it's just like nothing really happens on this street, and now something amazing just happened.
And what that brings up, and this was very, very true of Christo's work too, the work, the artist who, with his wife, wrapped structures. It involves the public. Postmodern art can be a collaborative experience, and the experience that the public has in the placement of this work can be a fabulous thing. But here's Michael Heiser's city. It was just completed after many, many years. And you can find information online about visiting it. I think this is my last video, and then I'll go back and I'll earn my pay and actually talk to you again. But one more quick video look. I look at that piece by Michael Heiser and I think, did I ever have 1/100th of that ambition? Anyways, more to talk about later. Little more work to look at. Olafur Eliasson is an artist who often works with color and perception. Maybe you could say his work is related to James Turrell. And here's an installation he did in Sweden in 2011. And again, keep in mind, I tried to say this in the beginning of our lecture, but philosophy is a big part of much postmodern art. And here he cites psychology, mathematics, science. All of these are disciplines that he draws on. And he mentions a scholar, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, as being the philosopher whose ideas are behind the perceptual nature of much of his artwork. Video art has been a powerful development in the postmodern era, and I'm going to show you just a brief segment of a work by Bill Viola. Bill Viola trained as a video artist in Syracuse, New York, when you couldn't train as a video artist, but he had the job of maintaining some electronics and some audiovisual equipment there and began to tinker with it and turned himself into an artist. And this is a piece that he did that uses high definition video to give you the feeling of an old master painting in motion. You know, he must have a lot of good friends to be able to shoot video like that. And I'll mention Bill Viola had a near drowning experience as a boy, and a lot of his work involves water. So that's something that's behind his imagery. Kara Walker has been making silhouette cutouts that take a traditional kind of a, county fair form of art, the silhouette, the cut silhouette, but she takes it into the area of racism and the sordid part, the evil part of our cultural past, and makes a narrative out of that. And she recently made this incredible installation in a former Domino Sugar warehouse, I think on the Hudson in New York. It's called the Sugar Subtlety, although people call it the Sugar Sphinx. And she said that the bleaching of naturally brown sugar to construct this figure is meant to symbolize both racism and colorism and the association between whiteness and power and beauty. And of course, this work is about reclaiming that in the form of an iconic sculpture that's both ancient and contemporary. And that's something you see quite a bit in postmodern art, the collision between the ancient and the present. Nicole Eisenman, boy, she's a great example of someone who uses bricolage, a disparity of images that make you question everything in the narrative, that make it almost incomprehensible and yet still compelling. And I want to point out where she uses appropriation. At the bottom of this picture, there is a tiny montage of figures pulling on a rope, walking with each other. This comes from a painting by Bruegel called The Blind Leading the Blind. So you can see she appropriated that, turned it around, and made that part of her imagery. You also see that in the work of Kehinde Wiley. And he has taken grand manner European portraiture and taken that feeling of royalty and power and finesse, and he's used it to elevate the imagery of Black people. You can see he also characteristically uses bold patterns that give a kind of new contemporary aesthetic and freshness to what he's doing. There's a close-up of one of these images. They're based in photography. He hires his models off the street, finds people that he thinks are appealing, and has a photographer, stage them for his paintings. He also did the very famous, portrait of Barack Obama that's been circulating. And I want to make a comment about it because my webinar, I get to make the comment. I'm not crazy about this portrait because I think that what Wiley does well is he elevates the imagery of African Americans and Black people. And I don't think Obama needed elevating. I think he'd already done that for himself. So it's not a typical Wiley painting in that respect. Wade Goyton is what you might call a digital painter. These images, these big stretched pieces that look like canvases are actually made on an inkjet printer. So people have called him, the Warhol, if you will, of abstract painting. And of course, here we're almost at the end of the lecture, but I have to mention architecture. Postmodern architecture has been written about, maybe theorized about, even more than postmodern art. So in the work of Frank Gehry, or in the work of Zaha Hadid, you see shapes that are seeming, irrational or impossible, or collisions of different periods of architecture. They're things that would have been impossible without technology. In the work of El Natsui, who lives in Nigeria, you see recycling brought into the postmodern vernacular. Straps, bottle caps, plastic cups, throwaway items, woven into a kind of a cultural tapestry that conceptually, has recycling, has something environmental as its underpinning. Yayoi Kusama is one of a number of artists now that are really giving us experiences rather than fixed works of art. And I'll give you just a 1-minute glimpse of one of these early rooms that she created. So to wind things up, I thought, hopefully you felt a lot of joy looking at the art in this lecture. Hopefully it excited you to see the variety and the ambition and the wonderful skepticism of these works of art. But postmodernity has its problems. And I want to illustrate the problems this way. This is a piece done by the late artist Felix Gonzalez Torres. It was done as a memorial to his lover, who I believe died of AIDS. And I think that the same thing, I think Gonzalez Torres also later died of AIDS. And it's 175 pounds of hard candy put into the corner of a gallery. So we would call that an installation. It was purchased by the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas for $7.8 million. And this is an interesting legal problem because this work, it's not copyrighted. You can't really buy the idea of a work of art, but that didn't stop Crystal Bridges. They said, we want to buy the rights to install this piece, the idea of this piece, conceptual work of art. And I thought, well, you could go to the candy aisle at Walmart and you could see, if you will, an installation of candy that in some ways, maybe you could make a comparison. Or you can go to the Crystal Bridges Museum and you can see the corner of candy that cost $7.8 million. And of course, I think that really was not an outrageous sum for them to pay because they are funded by one of the Waltons. There are others with similar fortunes, but Alice L. Walton is the philanthropist behind the Crystal Bridges Museum. She's worth over $58 billion. And I'll just put it out there, but Walmart pays an average across the country of $13.35 an hour. And it brings up the problem of, is the difference between art and non-art just the fact that the art world has certified it, that it's in a gallery, that's in a museum? And that certainly is something that Banksy took on in 2018 when he auctioned an artwork that tried to destroy itself, and then it ended up worth more money than it was before. So what is going to come? What's now the situation? What's going to come after postmodernism? I've had some people tell me, well, it's going to be NFTs. And I look at these bored apes and I think of what Homer Simpson said in the famous Planet of the Apes episode, that, you know, someday the apes would take back the earth. And honestly, I think NFTs are financial instruments. I'm not sure I can see them as works of art, but that's a geezer comment. I guess all we can really, know for sure is we're going to get postmodernism, which is maybe a way of saying that isms are exhausted and we should just trash the labels, and we just have to untangle it all and look at works of art in an individual fashion. And with that said, I'm going to go to questions in a moment, but I do want to remind you that we'll have the 15th and final installment of Monday Morning Modernism / Postmodernism on Monday, March 6th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And let's end screen share and see what you thought of all of that.
Wow, that was